Good morning and most welcome to Heidegger 1416. We are presently at the abode in Hissing Island outside Gothenburg, and the weather has turned into rainy late winter. It's still very warm, well above zero. Today I will take something out of a book by Malabou, Plasticity, the Promise of Explosion. My dear colleague Kalle here will make an introductory read about the author.
Hello. So, Malabou is a professor and a French philosopher. She's professor at 3 universities. First, in the philosophy department at the Center for Research in Modern European Philosophy at Kingston University, London. And then at the European Graduate School, which operates both in Switzerland and in Malta. And then thirdly, in the Department of Comparative Literature at the University of California, Irvine, a position formerly held by Jacques Derrida. Malabou graduated from the École Normale Supérieure Lettres et Sciences Humaines. Her doctorate was obtained under the supervision of Jacques Derrida from the École des Hautes Études en Sciences Sociales. And myself, said within parentheses, I have a master's degree in history from École des Hautes Études en Sciences Sociales. Her dissertation became the book L'avenir de Hegel, Plasticité, Temporalité, Dialectique, 1996. For instance, in 1999, Malabou published Voyager avec Jacques Derrida, La Contralle, Co-authored with Derrida. And I could say much about her. She's interested in neuroscience, psychoanalysis and philosophy. So there is an intersection between neuroscience, psychoanalysis and philosophy. So I hope that thanks to neuroscience and philosophy, a la Jacques Derrida, will give new insights to us. So back to Hans.
Why, thank you, Kalle, for that presentation. I will pick up a chapter. I found it aptly since we had a lot of Malabou, and it also goes into phantom limbs, some area that we've been covering in the 400 and 500 series, which is a very interesting neurological peculiarity that is often used to describe things that we usually don't understand. The limits of the body. We have the couples Blakesley and Blakesley. They show that the body expands well beyond the borders of the skin. This is chapter 24, page 297. It's called Phantom Limbs and Plasticity, Malabou and Current Neurobiology. At the end of chapter 3 of the Phenomenology of Perception, Malabou summarizes his recent research on the relationship between body and motricity. He declares what we have discovered through the study of motricity is, in short, a new sense of the word sense. By we, Malabou means the neurobiological study of motricity. This new meaning of the word meaning, sens, clearly emerges from the crossing between a phenomenological and biological approach to the body's spatiality. To the body's specific orientation in space and movement. When it comes to the body, to life, to the issue of being this living body in this world, it is of primary importance to give up what Malabou calls intellectualists' psychology. As well as idealist philosophy. and to stress the empirical biological dimension of our existential situation. He insists on the necessity of taking into account the most recent biological and neurobiological discoveries. This double approach constitutes, as we know, the singularity and uniqueness of the phenomenology of perception. My first issue here is to interrogate what currently remains from this approach. It seems that with the most recent neurobiological discoveries concerning bodily motricity, we are also witnessing the emergence of a new meaning of the word meaning. To what extent is this new meaning still indebted to Merleau-Ponty? To what extent is it not? at first sight, as is practically always the case, the confrontation between the domain of continental philosophy and that of strict neurobiology seems unbalanced. In the first part of this chapter, I will show that the current neurobiological meaning of the word meaning appears to be poorer and much less differentiated than the one Merleau-Ponty was talking about. Again, for Merleau-Ponty, the novelty of the word meaning results from the crossing of several approaches. It seems, on the contrary, that the neurobiological definition of the new meaning of the word meaning currently reduces it to a mere empirical and objective set of data. Deprived of any phenomenological or existential dimension. The problem is of great importance, as the issues at stake here, that is body, motricity, being in the world, as Merleau-Ponty exposes in chapter 4 of part 2, entitled Others and the Human World. concern the intertwining between nature and the human world. Between our biological existence and the way it projects itself into the community. This projection appearing to be the political translation of the bodily naturality. In fact, and this will be my second part, the discrepancy between two new meanings of the word meaning is only apparent and it will become clear that a genuine dialogue between Merleau-Ponty and current neurobiology is possible. Which transforms Merleau-Ponty's phenomenological conclusions in the most promising and interesting way. I will situate the confrontation in the specific context of two neural pathologies that cause profound modification of the body schema. First, phantom pains and phantom limbs. Second, a pathology called anosognosia. Anosognosia is a condition in which a person who suffers disability seems unaware or denies the existence of his or her disability. I put in a comment here, the same happens with a stroke in the right hemisphere. All disabilities would be denied by the left hemisphere. This may include unawareness of quite dramatic impairments, such as blindness or paralysis. This pathology only appears when the right hemisphere is injured, the patient then becoming unaware of the left side of his or her body. Why these examples? First, because Malabou announces the emergence of the new meaning of the word meaning, just after his analysis of such pathologies. Second, because the divergence between his approach and the current neurobiological one is quite manifest on these points. This divergence concerns the way of interpreting the kind of negation or negativity involved in phantom pains and anosognosia. Malabou considers phantom pains or anosognosia to be cases of what Freud called psychic refusal or disavowal. Phantom pains or phantom limbs would express the patient's refusal of her own mutilation. According to Malabou, the subject suffering from anosognosia would not say, "I cannot see that my left side is paralyzed," but "I do not want to see that my left side is paralyzed." Because being in the world necessarily implies a double situation of the body. A biological one and an existential one. These pathologies have two sides. They are both objective medical facts and hermeneutical modes of being. The body, as Merleau-Ponty puts it, interprets itself. It interprets itself as non-mutilated or as non-suffering. Because it cannot regard itself other than a significant whole despite its fragmentation. Merleau-Ponty and his book. What refuses the mutilation of the deficiency in us is an I that is engaged in a certain physical and interhuman world, an I that continues and tends toward its world despite deficiencies or amputations, that to this extent does not de jure recognize them. The refusal of the deficiency is but the reverse side of our inference in a world. The implicit negation of what runs counter to the natural movement that throws us into our tasks, our worries, our situation, and our familiar horizons. To have a phantom limb is to remain open to all of the actions of which the arm alone is capable. To stay within the practical field that one had prior to the mutilation. The body is the vehicle of being in the world, and for a living being, having a body means being united with a definite milieu, merging with certain projects, and being perpetually engaged therein. And the last one, being perpetually engaged therein, is being in the world. Very interesting indeed. Through the negation, the body and mind can preserve its integrity. It doesn't have to dissolve or fragmentize. good portion of the body, so to speak, is engaged in the world, and as such whole and wholesome. Another quote. Here, the phenomenon of the phantom limb is clarified through the phenomenon of anosognosia, which clearly demands a psychological explanation. Subjects who systematically ignore their right hand and who rather offer their left hand when asked for their right. Nevertheless, speak of their paralyzed arm as a long and cold serpent, which excludes the hypothesis of a genuine anesthesia and suggests the hypothesis of a refusal of the deficiency. End of quote. This is amazingly close to what Ian McGilchrist is writing, where the denial of the left hemisphere is often striking. The patient will lie, will actually not see the paralyzed or non-usable parts, and they can say most absurd things. When caught using their left arm, they can deny that it is their arm, pointing to it, putting it on the stomach of the patient, say there is a stranger's arm on my chest. Somebody left it there. This, of course, is showing that the left hemisphere is an enclosed system, and it fits very well with the psychological denial of the wholeness. Amply, very amply. Put a pause there and I can prepare the whiteboard with you. So I will continue, and here we have the word anosognosia, and thank you, Kalle, for writing out it in Greek. It could be called denial of a part of the body, or refusal to accept that something is gone. And for me, this came as a bit of a revelation, a broadening of the understanding of what constitutes embodiment. The person participating in the world that is his or her being in the world, is a whole. It is a working unit. And to help ease this understanding, think about the Gibsonian expression affordances. Affordances are not exterior, neither are they interior. They are part of planning, thinking, action. The things that are around me, for instance my knapsack, the equipment for this recordings, the constant followers in 2 thermoses, are a part of what constitutes my thinking, my existence, the unity and wholeness. To preserve this wholeness, anosognosia, stem into action. That is interesting in 2 aspects. Ian McGilchrist mentioned anosognosia frequently in his writings as a depiction of the inability to accept things as they are. But there is a second aspect that is also very interesting, and that of a higher unity. A unity that doesn't see skin as borders of your reality and yourself. So to avoid the parting of reality, we deny. We cannot accept it. My colleague Kalle mentioned also the Swedish world-famed Stockholm Syndrome. First officially clearly noted in a very famous bank robbery in Stockholm made by the infamous Clark Olofsson, who still is doing his nasty business to this day. The people who were subjected to kidnapping and threat in the end kept the whole, denied the threat, denied the absence, the amputation of freedom, and to preserve themselves as being able to survive. What happened later was that they kept the wholeness tendency and kept being in love with the same Clark Olofsson. Another similar instance is something called cognitive dissonance, where loss or bad fortune in the want to keep the wholeness is interpreted as positive, even prosperous, fortunate. I think these tendencies point to a stronger, more persistent unity, and you can parallel that with a common view of the body as ending with the skin and having nothing to do with being in the world, as most definitely is the view of John Searle and Hilary Putnam. And I would say the common sense view of these things. Merleau-Ponty and neurology is pointing to a greater participatory unity. That's very interesting realization. Maybe a comment here from Kalle, if you do have, yeah?
Okay.
Steady. Steady. There you go.
Can you hold?
No, sorry.
About 2 years ago in Newsred, we went through Guy Claxton, Philosophy in the Flesh, the book, Philosophy in the Flesh.
Oh.
And he mentioned phantom limbs. And what was Guy Claxton's point is that intelligence is not only in here, but also in the body, but also outside of the body, physical body. I think it was who read the book very thoroughly.
Ooh.
And so that was interesting point. The point that joins Malabou with Guy Claxton and phantom limbs. We should check if she mentions Guy Claxton in the bibliography if we're interested to see. And to leave this behind, Guy Claxton and phantom limbs, to go to anasognosia, that is knowledge, that is the same word that you have in Gnosticism. Knowledge, not having knowledge about your sickness, gnosis, sickness. Properly speaking, this is only used about damage in limited sense, like in McClick's, if you have damage on the right side of the brain, you deny a part of your reality.
The left, yeah.
Yeah, yes. But we could also say that this is also symptomatic for the whole university, in the sense university or contemporary or whatever, that there is a denial of part of the body. That is, they think that the intelligence is only in the head, that is like the brain, the body, butt symptom. So this is it's a metaphor for the whole university system, except for a few exceptions, like say Malabou and Merleau-Ponty, who is dead unfortunately. So it's a very good point. Let me give this back to you, Hans. Let me see. I can take this, and you can perhaps remove this microphone that I don't see.
Yeah, very good. Yeah, there is a large-scale anosognosia, I would say. And the odd thing pointed out by McGilchrist, and I also remember that was a point of lack of Johnson also, investigate how percepts and concepts are out there, they are bodily. And in that case, one could say the borders are fluent between the body and the outside. But I think it also points to a bigger unity, a stronger unity, not as fragile as this diminished and marginalized conception of the body. I think there is strength there, and Lakoff Johnson points out, if we deny the body, we denied intellectual life. Because the most abstract terms we know, they all come from the body. And that we can see philosophy in the flesh clearly points that out. Whereas the repetitive, simple concepts are more mind-based, more in the brain or in the interior, so to speak. So they also have this disjunction between left and right hemisphere. The right is being more encompassing in the world, the left, the withdrawn, and of course the one who do repetitive simple things, simple tasks, servant, poor chum. You can put a pause. So we continue after the second site of Malabou, and we are presently at page 299. The refusal must then be understood as an act of Hingebung, meaning bestowing. The body maintains its integrity through negation. What hides behind the fear of having lost a part of oneself is the fear of being excluded from the realm of social and political life. Malabou often describes this fear in the war-wounded who have lost an arm. His fear is that of being excluded from the human community. Held back to childhood or primitivity, that is to pre-political and prehistorical life. A life in which movement, motor actions are not yet science. That is very, very important. Movement becomes science, or all science. The brain, in particular the motor cortex, reorganizes the body schema after the accident or the lesion in order to sustain the refusal of deficiency and the need for the political meaning of being in the world. The refusal is then both a neural and phenomenological phenomenon. To differentiate it from the mere Freudian disavowal, Merleau-Ponty calls it a repression or an organic suppression. Such terms, which are hardly Cartesian, force us to form the idea of an organic thought, by which the relation between the psychical and the physiological could become conceivable. The unity of the psychic and the physiological forms a shield against the loss of the historical meaning of being in the world. The refusal of the deficiency, which is an overall attitude of our existence, needs this highly specialized modality, which we call a sensory-motor circuit, in order to actualize itself. Which maintains the amputated limb in existence in order to maintain a void that the history of the subject will fill in. when we now turn towards the current neurobiological analysis of the same pathologies, we can only be struck by what appears almost as an incompatibility with Merleau-Ponty's approach. It seems that the new meaning of the word meaning, brought to light by such analysis, is purely and simply a loss of meaning. A loss of meaning or a regression compared to the rich, complex description of the phenomenon of being in the world. I get an idea here how you can compare it. You can't learn to play football by yourself. You need the world, you need the team, the other players. And you also need the rules of the game and quite possibly the audience. A loss of the political meaning that phantom limbs and anosognosia are, according to Merleau-Ponty, supposed to protect. Most neurologists currently consider these pathologies to be deprived of any psychological or existential signification. The inability to acknowledge disease in oneself, as Damasio characterizes anosognosia in Descartes' error, would not have any psychological causes. Quote from Descartes' error. Imagine a victim of a major stroke, entirely paralyzed in the left side of the body, unable to move hand and arm, leg and foot, face half immobile, unable to stand or walk. And now imagine that same person oblivious to the entire problem, reporting that nothing is possibly the matter. Answering the question, how do you feel, with a sincere, fine. Someone unacquainted with anosognosia might think that this denial of illness is psychologically motivated. That it is an adaptive reaction to the previous affliction. I can state with confidence that this is not the case. End of quote. It is not the case. The inability to regard oneself as disabled would only be a non-dialectic kind of new. With only one meaning. The patient, for objective and medical reasons, would be absolutely unable to see that she is amputated, that she is impaired, sorry. There is no refusal in such a fact. Only a physical cognitive incapacity. The denial of illness results from the loss of a particular cognitive function. This loss of cognitive function depends on a particular brain system, which can be damaged by stroke or by various neurological diseases. Damasio's approach to phantom limbs and phantom pain is extremely rapid and manifests the same abstract negativity. Patients with a phantom limb condition may report that they feel their missing limb is still there, but they realize that it is clearly not. It seems that we are facing two opposite conceptions of pathological negativity. At first one, full of sense of hermeneutical and political resources. That tends to establish the psychological meaning of this negativity. And the second one, hardwired and reductionist, that reduces negativity to a one-sided objective reaction. The dimensions of being in the world, being in the community, the effort to maintain social networks by means of organic repression would have purely and simply disappeared. Great. In reality, as I announced at the beginning, a sacred dialectical relationship links these two negativities. is avowal on the one hand and abstract factual negativity on the other. This secret dialectical link organizes every kind of encounter or confrontation between continental philosophy or neurobiology or cognitive psychology in general. We gradually discover that the neurobiological point of view concerning phantom limbs, phantom pains, and asognosia conceals not a reduction but a radicalization of Merleau-Ponty's position. A deconstruction of certain rigid definitions of being in the world, and that it addresses a genuine political issue in the phenomenology of perception. Before I expose this reversal, I will briefly develop two neurobiological arguments that achieve and accomplish in a way Damasio's reductionist position. The first comes from V.S. Ramachandran, who in his book Phantoms in the Brain insists upon the impossibility of considering phantom pains and limbs or anosognosia to be psychic refusals or denials. These phenomena, he says, of course express the need to preserve the body schema's stability. In that sense, the Freudian defenses are useful to understand the nature of this need for stability. Rapidly, though, Ramachandran comes to the same conclusions as Damasio. First, Freud says that all of us use defense mechanisms every day of our lives. What then is the difference between a normal and a pathological defense mechanism or psychic refusal? One problem with the Freudian view is that it doesn't explain the difference in magnitude of psychological defense mechanisms between patients with anosognosia and what is seen in normal people. It is true that Merleau-Ponty does not seem to offer an answer to this question. Second, anosognosia only appears when the right hemisphere is impaired. The second problem with the Freudian view is that it does not explain the asymmetry of this syndrome. When people suffer damage to the left brain hemisphere with paralysis on the body's right side, they almost never experience denial. Merleau-Ponty does not seem to have an answer to this problem either. In order to distinguish these pathologies from psychic refusals, Ramachandran proposes to characterize them as neglect syndromes, without genuine hermeneutical dimensions. The other argument goes even further. It is developed by Sean Gallagher in his book, How the Body Shapes the Mind. Focusing on phantom limbs and pain phenomena, Gallagher noticed that Merleau-Ponty never takes into account the pathology called aplasia. That is, the existence of phantoms related to congenital absence of a limb or following early amputations prior to the age of 6. The following is from Gallagher. The psychological and neurological literature stretching from the early 20th century to the early 1960s indicated that in cases of aplasia and in most cases of early amputation, no phantoms developed. This was the established scientific doctrine, and it was the view held in the overwhelming majority of studies until the early 1960s. End of quote. Merleau-Ponty is of course part of this list. What is at stake? The refusal to consider the existence of aplasia is founded on the fact that most psychologists, including Merleau-Ponty himself, held that no body schema exists at birth. Even less Can there be for them something like an innate body schema? Another quote from Gallagher. The studies conducted by Simmel confirm this view. There is no phantom in aplasia because the limb in question is never experienced and thus never incorporated into a body schema or body image. This view of the phantom was also expressed by Malabou in connection with its acceptance of the received doctrine that the body schema is a product of the development. End of quote. We encounter plasticity at this point. According to Malabou, the body schema is plastic, and this plasticity has two characteristics. First, it means that the body schema forms itself under the influence of experience and development. It is supple and open to change. Second, this plasticity is also to be understood as a compensatory power.
One hour and 40.
Second, this plasticity is also to be understood as a compensatory power. When the body schema is impaired, it reconstitutes its integrity and reforms itself. Hence, the vivid sensation of the missing limb experienced by the amputee. Gallagher shows that taking early amputation or aplasia into account challenges this accepted vision of the body schema. The body schema, states Gallagher, is innate. The more recent data on aplasics indicate that aplastic phantoms do exist, and it is sometimes inferred on the basis that this evidence for an innate body schema. Aplasia would be the expression of a flaw in this innate body schema. The body schema is innate. Such a statement produces, at first sight, a terrible effect. And I will do my summary here.
Pause.
Just let me say a few words. This is like reading a thriller. Here we have Merleau-Ponty, the philosopher we just went through, and he's contrasted towards other favorites of mine, like especially Ramachandran, and to a certain extent also Damasio and Gallagher. And I think embedded here, and this is my hunch, I don't know, but embedded here is the famous border between what constitutes my body or what doesn't constitute it. Are we in the world, or are we, like the phantom limbs, disconnected to a world where we just sort of fly by, as I would say, indicated by Damasio. Oddly enough, since his book's name is Descartes' Mistake. I can put a pause on it. It's, as I said, it's like a thriller reading this chapter of Malabou. I really like it. And it stirs a lot of new thinking, and contradictions are erupting in my mind right now. But I would say it's the Damasian take is still living in the idea of psyche and body cast into a Newtonian neutral homogeneous environment, and the psyche body is floating in this ether. And there is an allowance in the book Descartes' Error, which I really liked when it came out. There are some allowances for the environment not being completely neutral and homogeneous, but the individual is definitely separate, and it has clear psychological borders. The other allowance that Damasio gives is that psyche and body are allowed to interact, or healthily or dynamically. But I would say his foot, as the foot of someone who's very similar, that is John Searle, is still in this divide, thinking of that the surrounding is non-psychical and non-bodily. This part is not of the body. And once you are in that concluding mode of attention, no other syllogism can be possible than to show that the denial of limbs in aplasia especially, which makes the argument so strong against Merleau-Ponty, could actually be part of the outside and part of the inside. Not completely biological, neither not completely psychological. So what Malabou is striving to do, and this is my guess, I cannot know at this point, is trying to show that there are some dichotomies here in the foreground, and of course Gallagher makes the point even stronger. There's a historical interesting strengthening of the argument. Until rather recently we did not know these things. We had no idea that aplasia, which is congenital loss of limbs or amputation before the age of 6, there is actually phantom limbs present there. This is often mentioned by Ian McGilchrist. It's most pertinent, I think, because there is another dichotomy residing here, and that's the one not questioned or put into the air, and that is the before-after. And aplasia, which I took away here, unfortunately, I have to write it again, is happening before the event of this. It is still in the womb. There is no psyche established, and there is, of course, in the regular sense, from the Damascian, Gallagherian viewpoint, no body scheme developed. But we cannot be certain that this dichotomy holds. Quantum mechanics has already eroded it. And Merleau-Ponty, as Jacques Derrida in his writings, pointed to the over-reliance of this unquestioned or even uninvestigated notion of before and after. I can just give some guesses. We don't know why aplasia is developed, but do we truly know that all psychic can only be something that we speak and are aware of? And we've spoken a lot of times about the dichotomy between mind and matter. Couldn't a body map be more material? As in a case mentioned by Couples-Blakesley, a man can be injured from a heavy nail impaling him between his toes. We know those things. We know that the body scheme extends into the exteriority. It is part of the environment. This border we know for a fact does not hold. It's rather an osmosis going on. There is interpenetration, as we mentioned so many times before. Space itself is constantly interpenetrating itself. So these trial at upholding the dichotomies, which of course stem from the profession Damasio has, and Gallagher and Ramachandran. Those things are, in their line of thinking, well established. The dichotomy is already present. And isn't it obvious? The environment is never ever mentioned in Damasio's book. Not even once. All things out here are 100% material and homogeneous, not part. Of neither psyche nor body. It's a John Searlean conception of an intellectual mass floating around in the environment. And this cannot be part of the psyche, and neither can the material be psyche. That is my personal take on it, to be confused with what Malabou says. Maybe a comment from my dear colleague Gallagher. Make a swap of microphones here if you stand still. Don't move, don't move. There you go.
Thank you, thank you.
Cheers.
Let me see if I understood this. So Merleau-Ponty, he forgot to mention, didn't mention early amputations, that is, in the sense that amputations that were inherent aplasia. That is, if I, at the moment of my birth, I don't have, let's say, a R, then there is aplasia. So Merleau-Ponty did not mention these cases, and Jean Gallagher mentions this is a, he pointed out that Merleau-Ponty did not mention that. And if I understand correctly, Gallagher says that this is a problem, since that lack will affect you. You could call it a Derridan trace. If I am born without an arm, it will of course affect me in some way. And so Gallagher made a Derridian deconstruction of the body. That is, there is always an original lack. And I was thinking about a Chinese custom that was present until about 100 years ago. Foot binding, lotus feet. That is, Chinese ladies, when Chinese girls are very small, they force their feet into very elegant shoes, very small, so that their feet cannot grow longer, and that is considered very elegant. And that must, of course, influence the whole psyche body. If my foot is very small, of course it will affect my body and psyche as well. So that is also something that happens very early in your development. So that is another problem. So do you want to add something, Hans, concluding?
Yes, I like the lotus feet of those. It's a horrible costume, of course. I was also thinking of what we mentioned 2 lectures ago. I think Roland Barthes, Empire of the Signs. And one sign that often gets confused or misconceived is the oriental bow. It's a way of changing the body into a bow, but it is not an act of subservient. It is not an act of putting oneself in a lower category. It's a way of changing the environment, I would say, to get a better fit. Whereas always the bow for a Westerner, and for me as well, was, I interpreted as psychologically. Didn't make sense to do that, but I'm so used to the Western bow is something coming from me. I surrender, so to speak. I'm lower than the king or the nobleman. Roland Barthes points out, and he calls it sign. It is a sign that changes your attitude, so the environment, other people and you are fitting better together in harmony, not giving disunity, but giving unity. My example is that it was so hard for me to understand that. But I realized after some time, it didn't mean that he surrendered, he or she went lower than me. It is part of this that we don't refer to as having the characteristic of psychological, spiritual, or insubstantial. This is a deadened area. This is hugely questioned in the book, The Matter with Things. This is the main point in Ian McGilchrist's book, that matter is not as soulless, not as unpsychological as we think. And it's most not definitely something that we know what it exists of. It's as mysterious as the psyche itself. Not this ignored by Damasio on every page. There is not a single mentioning of Florence in his whole book. I think there is some slight mentioning in his latest book. It's been rather productive. This was very interesting. Thank you, Kalle, for insisting on this book, and I hope you enjoyed as well. Have a very pleasant, still morning. Bye-bye.
Thank you.